Yeah. So this meeting is being recorded and it is also going live on Facebook. I hope that is okay with everybody. Yeah. Okay. Great. So a very warm welcome, Abhishek. Abhishek is the founder of the Blue Ribbon Movement. It builds leadership amongst the youth. He is a leadership facilitator, speaker, author, coach by profession, and a stand-up philosopher by choice. He has an MBA and lives in Mumbai with his family. A very warm welcome, Abhishek.
Thank you, Rashmi. Good to be here.
Thank you. And I'm managing people coming in as well. Abhishek, my first question would be, what do you, what are you doing these days? Like in times of COVID when everything is, shut down.
Yeah, I mean,
What's that?
I can start with that. These bells are going to keep ringing, Rashmi, unless you can turn them off. See if
Right.
you can. So COVID times are fairly busy and interesting times. I think any times are interesting times, but I would say especially times of change are particularly interesting and exciting if you want to adapt, right? For people who want to adapt, I think it's a very interesting time. So it is for me because things around us are shifting, and so I've been fairly alive, fairly active. I divide up my time as you spoke about in my introduction. A
Right.
part of my time that I spend is in doing leadership work. I facilitate learning journeys, and I would say one of the ways I look at what I do is help people think long term. When people think long term, uh, they not only think about themselves, but they also think about the planet. They also think about future generations, and I
Yeah.
think leadership is a lot about that. So I facilitate learning journeys. I call myself an L&D expert, learning and development expert in that way. And the other part of my work is work at Blue Ribbon Movement. The work at Blue Ribbon Movement has to do with doing experiments in deep democracy. The part of the piece of the puzzle I've been working on solving has to do with doing decision making with full consent. So some thinking there keeps me alive. And yeah, some amount of writing, some amount of generally reflecting on things. Been doing long form podcasts also. So a whole set of things, active times, and of course thinking and seeing what is going on. I think thinking is a time consuming intensive activity. Not the thinking of going
Right.
in circles, but really thinking about what's happening is fairly time consuming in its own way. So being occupied with all of that, yeah.
Right. That's wonderful. So you have been, as you said, you've been conducting workshops for a while now. So one of the workshops that you conduct on is Ikigai, and a lot of people were interested in it. So one of the workshops I did, one of the first workshops I did was about integrity, and one of the second workshops I did was about Ikigai. So either of the two things that you may want to talk about, which comes under release, and what would you suggest? How does one flow, or whatever? And you can talk about integrity as well.
No, I can go into Ikigai first.
Right.
Think since it's a word that gets thrown around so much, I've never used that word incidentally in my workshops.
Yeah.
We used to, when we knew it before the book came out, we used to use the word hedgehog because hedgehog was the intersection of those four circles, and now it's Ikigai. Uh, what one of the things I do teach is more a version of Ikigai, which we call life space design. And instead of just looking at four circles, it really looks at 9 boxes and sees the intersections between those. And I'll talk a bit about that later. But I think first I want to talk about Ikigai because the thing is that having a concept like Ikigai around makes everybody feel that they should be living it, and it's almost like, oh God,
Right.
I'm not living Ikigai. Around me, people are living their purpose, and millennials are also a very purpose generation in that way. They're really
Right.
a lot about purpose. So it's almost fashionable to live your Ikigai. It's like non-negotiable to say, okay, you have to. It's just an unsaid kind of thing. But in my experience, I think Ikigai is way more messy than a book, and it's exceptionally difficult to actually truly live your ikigai, it's hard. It takes a lot of hard work to do it, and we can go into why also. And you can, I mean, if that is something that you'd like to go into. But broadly speaking, it's really hard to get your ikigai going. If you really look at each of the four circles there,
Right.
each of them is extremely difficult to figure out in themselves, and then finding an intersection is like is even crazier. Uh, Unfortunately, people kind of throw around the term very easily, and they do not question what's behind this kind of logic or what it takes. I guess there's not enough questioning there. So I would also say that Ikigai is one of the frameworks. There are so many ways to look at what you should do in your life. Ikigai is commonsensically, rationally, it makes a lot of sense. But there are so many other dimensions also. What are your values? What's your larger kind of context that you're coming from? What is your caste, socioeconomic orientation? What is a call? So there are so many other dimensions as well. I would say. Right? So I think that's where it is. The approach I talk about is called life space design. And life space
Mm-hmm.
design is really about taking a designer's approach to life. So we approach our life, and life's a fairly complex kind of phenomenon. It's not a causal phenomenon where one thing leads to the other. It's like all areas of your life go on simultaneously. You have a family, work, health, spirituality, hobbies, finances. Or it's like all the balls are juggling. You're juggling all these balls, and the balls are also going in their own kind of orbit. So life space design really aims to reduce some of that chaos, some of that confusion, and kind of represent it into a 2D kind of a representation of different areas, and also lets you see how each area influences other, so that you're able to go into one direction, right? The end intent is that every part of my being, can it be aligned? Can every area of my life be aligned? Can everything support everything so that I move in a single direction? I think for most of us, there are parts of us that want to move into a direction, and then there are parts that want to pull back,
Right.
right? And I mean, I can give an example straight from Ikigai itself, right? There is a circle called what you love, and
Right.
there is one which kind of what makes you money. And when you see what people love, I've very often found that the proportion of people who love singing, dancing, photography, art, theater is way more in my general conversation than people who say, oh, I want to be an accountant, for example, or I want to be a programmer. Now people are teaching coding to kids, but net we are very artistic, expressive creatures. And then what makes money, like making money off art, is like really hard, right? Like if you're a creative
Right.
person, you have to put your creative stuff aside, you have to get down, and you have to do the work that the world wants you to do. I mean, where does
Right.
Ikigai go there? So you tweak and modify, and these things pull each other. So life space design is about taking a bird's eye view, looking at all that I want to accomplish and how do I best accomplish it, right? In a way that every area supports every other area. So it's design thinking applied to yourself and your life.
Right. So life space design is something which you have come up with, you have created, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So you have your copyright to this.
No, it's in the open source in some ways. It's
Okay.
kind of it's available. We take people through those workshops, but when somebody reaches out for some help, it's really it belongs to
Right.
the world. Relead, of course, is copyrighted, and Relead is the larger umbrella in which this happens. So, in case we feel it's being stolen, you will receive a notice from us.
Okay. All right. Would you like to talk also about integrity? I think it's one of the most powerful
I could talk
tools.
about integrity. I think this is a slice of knowledge from a larger body of knowledge called ontological leadership. This is Werner Erhard's work, which he first did in EST. Then he did it in Landmark Forum, and then now he's a part of something called the Barbados Group. I'm naming this because he moved his organizations, and
Right.
integrity is a concept that we've taken as a slice from that. And it really looks at emptying the word integrity, उस शब्द को खाली करना पहले तो from whatever we
Right.
know, and filling
Mm-hmm.
it up with a different meaning, a meaning of being whole, being complete, being sound, being in perfect condition. And then we look at the integrity of a word, and when we start examining the integrity of every word we say, every promise we make, and so on, we start
Right.
seeing the gaps in our own day-to-day day-to-day living, how we cut corners in living in small ways, how we don't give our best, how we don't honor expectations, how we make promises without thinking, how do we break all our implied promises. So integrity is a very powerful, actionable body of knowledge that lets people be more productive, that lets people take control of their lives. So I would say it's quite awesome, and it can be self-studied. I mean, I have mostly self-studied it. I got introduced to it in a day and a half kind of a workshop with some facilitator friends were doing as a trial workshop as their commitment to run that workshop forward. But since this has been like 7-8 years now, I've been studying it myself, and I think anybody who can look it up can deep dive and study. The real thing is in applying, of course. Like we can all study and memorize things, but if it's not applied to life, it really means nothing. So
Yeah, of course. So, one of the struggles that people who are in social sector, they face is, the question of a livelihood. So, one of the things that the difficult part is, like, it's okay to be in the alternate space, to, want to do something different other than the mainstream. But again, people wonder, how does one maintain a living standard? How does, this is one of the questions that has been very, like, prominent for the youth.
yeah, I mean, I would think of it as kind of thinking through two routes, right? One is the simple social worker route. You can call it SSW, simple social worker. Uh, the fact is that India still has a huge hangover from Gandhiji, Vinoba, and others. And the idea that in case you are serving the society, Daridra Narayan, and therefore necessarily you must also suffer, you must be poor, you must be one with
Right,
their suffering. And I think a huge part of the social sector still runs with that idea. It still runs with the idea of voluntary suffering. Also, voluntary
right,
simplicity, I would say. And there is absolutely nothing wrong in being voluntarily simple, right? So voluntary simplicity. So one part I think is the path of thinking that I am kind of dedicating myself to the society, and I'm really not in the money game. I'm not in the lifestyle game. I'm in the service game, and I'll do what it takes to serve, and I'll look for work in the service space. And and anyways, things in the social sector are changing. So there are jobs which pay you and let you live a reasonable lifestyle. But when you're signing up for that track, what you're basically saying is that I'm not going to go after those 3 foreign vacations every year, or that
right,
home by the sea kind of thing. You're kind of saying no. I'll serve, right? The other track
right,
is for all of us. I mean, and this track I think is for a selected few people. It's not for me. It's not for most people. There is
right.
another track which is for each of us, I think, and that's a track that I also followed after a lot of reflection between these two tracks. I've spent so much time to think through which of these to follow. The second track is really where you are more a professional social worker. You're earning your money from somewhere, and hopefully wherever you're earning your money from also makes the world a better place. And then you're
Mm-hmm.
using the rest of your time, money, energy towards creating a better world, right? So you're constantly trying to get leverage. You're trying to earn from lesser and lesser amount of your time. You have a greater surplus, and then you're investing
Right.
that surplus into the society. You're investing that surplus into giving, into volunteering. So instead of a simple social worker, if you're a professional social, and by professional social worker I mean a professional who is also a social worker, not a person who's following social
Okay.
work by
So kind
profession.
of walking the middle path, you would say?
Yeah, so on this side of the path, so to me, there is not such a middle path, right? I mean, in a way, both paths need to balance out. But when I'm saying this kind of an extreme path of making your money, is there is an internal clarity that you like the good life. You want the good life.
Right.
You like good things in
Exactly.
life. And it takes a lot of courage to look at yourself in the eye and say, I love my money, or I want a great lifestyle, right? It's very hard, especially for people in the social space, to say, I want to, splurge, want to have a lifestyle. There's so much guilt also, like guilt about
Yes.
consumption when others don't have, guilt about spending water and electricity and carbon footprint when
Everything.
you travel. So yeah, so I would say those are two clear paths. And I think a clear decision on internally saying, who am I really? Am I a person who can, for the rest of my life, live simply, just get the joy of service, and will I be complete? Or am I a person who at some stage will start wanting the good life because there's constant advertising, my peers are kind of doing this, and so on. And I think the decision has to be there between those, I would say.
Right. Right. So, do we have any questions here right now? or we go ahead with, we have people coming in as yet, and I'm sorry, couldn't beep it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
So, yeah.
while there are questions, I want to just share one more dimension
Yeah.
to the last question you asked,
Mm-hmm.
Rashmi. So the thing about ikigai is right. What is good for the world is one circle,
Yeah.
and the circle assumes that it's so easy to figure out what is good for the world. It's not so easy to figure out what is good for the world. So there was an NGO. There is an NGO that kind of feeds the hungry, and what they do when they go to feed the hungry is that middle class people who prepared really tasty meals show up once a week and line up all the kids and give them food. Adults don't get food, and the basti doesn't know that they are going to come, so they just show up. There could be a day when they don't come, a Sunday where they don't come because nobody cooked or so on. So on one end, they're doing good for the world because they're feeding hungry people, right? But on the other end, they're doing a lot of damage, a lot of harm to self-esteem because
Right.
they're dishing out free meals. They're also creating a fight, literally an intergenerational fight between adults and young people. And they're also discriminating right there itself, right? So somebody can look back and say that, okay, at least something is better than nothing. But then you can also look back and say, what happens when they stop giving that food, right? It's like some of us helped in Corona, very necessary, but eventually we also need to hold the state accountable, right? So
Yeah.
so kind of there is that first level of do good. There is a second level of do good where you're trying to shift the state, you're trying to shift systems, right? You're trying to do good not at only a local level but at a systemic level, or as they say, it's like you're not rescuing children from the river, you're climbing upstream to see who's throwing these children up all anyways. It's like if you're trying to, there's this nice story where you save a child drowning from the river, and by the time you save him, there are two more children, so you're running to save those two, and by the time you rescue them, there are two more coming. So you get stuck into this cycle of trying to rescue, but if only you
Right.
would have the time to go up and stop the source where they're coming from. So I think some doing
Oh.
good or a lot of doing good necessarily requires us to go to the source of the problems, that are happening to us, and that takes time, that takes some clarity, and so on. And
Right.
that may not make
So,
money.
yes. So when you talk about the source and going to the, really do the hard work, it brings me to another question, which is like, if you are, kind of very favorite is the long form. Like, it's like you prefer long form, and we are kind of out of that generation maybe where the attention span is maybe 6 seconds these days. Yeah, so how would you, I mean, this generation that we are, younger generation that we have, and the kind of attention span they have, how do we, shift from shifting, saving children to going to that source and, kind of fixing it up there?
I would say we all have bad attention spans. I think we defeated the lowest attention span was goldfish at 8 seconds, and I think at some stage I remember reading this trivia column news that now human beings have officially 6 seconds attention span, and we at least it's a generational thing, not only millennials but all of us, because we are all around wired, to have our attention which is wavering. And
Right.
I think that definitely needs disruption, right? And everybody seems to kind of pander to that trend, which is to play to that small attention span by writing a sensational headline, or by
Mm-hmm.
by creating some kind of a hook that gets you there. And since everybody is doing it, it's like a race to the bottom. Everybody wants your attention, and you're like this constant child whose attention is going through beep beep, the red circle, the notification, the message, the ad, the right. So long form is a disruption. It's like a rebellion. You say that I'm going to rebel against this short form. I'm going to rebel because short form or short attention span is also shortness of thinking. And in some ways, if it's shortness of thinking, you can't go deep. You cannot make chained long thoughts. And a lot of chained long thoughts which go deep require that discipline of taking an idea, chaining it to the next, chaining it to the next, digging all the way to the basics, finding the basics, and then building back up. That chain is a very long chain. It's not
Right.
just like small instant kind of thoughts. It's not that, five great instant thoughts. Five instant thoughts is very different from five thoughts that go link to each other deeper and deeper and deeper. It's like five eyes. So to me, long form is like resisting the system. It's like saying that, okay, you can do reduce our attention spans. We will systematically work on extending these attention spans. We'll do what it
Right.
takes to expand these attention spans. And I think it's an awesome form because it really allows us to go deeper into ideas. It allows for very long answers. Like even as we are speaking and we have an hour, if we would have like 3 hours, each of these answers could be so much deeper, so much richer. And
Mm-hmm.
we would be able to kind of bring out so many nuances of each and every answer, right? We'd not be in a hurry to kind of move on. So I would say that long form is something that I feel each of us must engage in. Long form reading, long form writing, long form podcasts, long form YouTube videos. I think it really allows for some deep contemplation and thinking. So and it's a challenge to the system. I mean, you can flow with the system, but we need some people who challenge the system also. Otherwise, like, what's the whole point of tolerating such a messed up system?
Right. Right. So yeah, there you go. There are a couple of examples that talked about long-term reading and writing, something that can be easily done by all of us. And here, I guess there's a question in here. Mm, So I think
Which
that
one do you want to
okay.
take?
Anybody, which one do you want to take? The two
So whatever.
questions,
I mean,
one from
you're
Rohit.
moderating, so you tell me.
Right. So yeah, and, we can go with the first one. Can development sector work in urban India as most of the development projects are in rural area?
I
So he's
mean, this
asking,
question.
yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. Sorry, you were saying
Mm,
something, Rashmi? Were
sorry.
you saying you were saying
No,
something? He's
no. You go
asking.
ahead. No, no. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think so. So to me, this question, I mean, I don't know what Rohit means by development sector, because this must mean very specifically like development as, say, constructing, rural houses or toilets or Narega work, for example. But apart from that, I would say that there is enough kind of there is enough development sector work in the urban areas. There are poor people. Firstly, there are enough poor people in urban areas, so there is absolutely no dearth of areas where one can contribute in urban India. In fact, a lot more NGOs are in urban India, I would say, in terms of their headquarters, in terms of where they fundraise and so on. So problems are everywhere. So wherever there's a problem, there is development sector. It can go and kind of work on. And problems that are not solved by the government, I'm saying, are everywhere, and that's where they can kind of go into the development sector. So yeah, there is enough development sector work in urban India as well. Except the nature of the projects is different. The nature of the project has to do with much more building human capital, teaching socio-economic learning, building peace and harmony, and so on. So it may not be so much of sort of field work in that way as you're saying rural might. But yeah, there is enough work, I think.
Right. There's another question from Malhar. He's asking, how do I deal with life when I know that to live simplistically and help the world be a better place and keep my life happy and small and close is better choice morally. But I love the glitter, the wealth, the path, what you talked about, the things like that which life has to offer. How do you reset your system on moral ground? So how do you reset?
I mean, I would say don't reset. I would say that if you have a clear love right now of glitter, wealth, power, and things like that, then there's no harm in pursuing them, because in their pursuit, you may find yourself at a place where you have a different kind of impact. And from that place, you can do a lot, right? So, and the reason I'm advocating this is very specific, right? Like, if living simplistically is not your preferred choice, then at some stage it can really get to you. Some stage life can feel really rough. You're constantly at war with yourself. You're constantly at battle with yourself. Now, do you want to go to battle with yourself every single day? Right, that's kind of the question. And in case the answer, so right now there is a fight there, right? But there is something like a moderation. There is something like going after glitter, going after wealth, going after power, and going with when you drive your car, you have one pedal on the brake also. So it's not like you're going to go and go into insane power, insane wealth, and so on, right? And honestly, being wealthy and having a simple lifestyle are not mutually exclusive. I mean, Warren Buffett apparently drives his own car, lives in a 3-bedroom kitchen. Or if you look at Marcus Aurelius and his ideas about how a poor man and a king can live the frugal, simple life, irrespective. Be wealthy, don't spend the money. Be powerful and use the power well. Right? It's just that the point is to not give into wealth, not give into power. Then you're not using power, power is using you. You're not using wealth, wealth is using you. So really drawing that boundary. But I would say if there is a fight between these two, just be shameless, go for the wealth, go for the power. At some stage, there is a seed of goodness in you, and that seed will probably need some time to fully sprout. But it is there. That's why the question is coming. And you have to trust nature that in the right season, that seed will sprout. And it's much easier to leave behind wealth, power, anything, and go to the simple path than to move from simple to wealthy. It's always easier the other way, right? So you're always better off being wealthier and going simpler than being simple and cursing yourself for not having money. And we're also, as millennials and as middle class people, we are used to our creature comforts. We've been brought up in a certain way, a certain base standard of upbringing. So we've been brought up that way, right? And because we've been brought up that way, we are used to certain standards, and there's nothing wrong in being used to them. I think you can voluntarily simplify them, but there is no like standard rule that, oh God, you didn't simplify, you're a bad person. I mean, each of us is a child of God in a way. We're all entitled to enjoy the world, enjoy life the way our soul really wants to enjoy it.
Right. There you go. Uma is asking, do we want to battle with ourselves every day? What a meaningful. Okay, it's more of a comment. So yeah, there you go. And Swapnil has a question. Why do you think good, committed, honest people lack in institutionalizing efforts towards a positive change?
It's a great question, Swapnil. I think capitalism has made us rotten. It has created a rot in us, a selfishness in us that we don't fully recognize. Each time you do a Uber discount code or push others to get into the local train, which we all do. I'm saying this because I also do this. Each time the message that's going to my psyche is that right? I as an individual, me, and at most my family and so on. I think our capacity to get united has been systematically destroyed. And I feel it has been destroyed because the system, the mainstream system benefits from the broken fabric of relationships. And let me talk about how, right? If I'm just satisfied with a very good conversation walking in a garden with my partner or my friend, then I'm not going to go and necessarily catch a movie, or I'm not going to go to the restaurant and consume, right? If we come together to do things and enjoy things, right? And that satisfaction, as that breaks, if you sell the idea to each person that each of us needs our own cars, each of us needs to have our own, right? So I think even people who are good, committed, and honest do not see that there is a selfishness that is stopping them from actually collaborating, right? And so that's one kind of reason why we can't really come together and institutionalize. The other is we don't have very good ways. I would say that when we make decisions, especially in citizen collectives, when we come together, it's a disaster because everybody is so knowledgeable. Everybody has so much to speak. I feel like every person in India is like a Rumi plus Kabir plus Gandhi plus like Krishnamurti combined kind of a person. So each of us has so much to say that we don't have technology to communicate. Like it's almost like you have this much space and you have these many words that want to be spoken. So we don't have technologies of organizing. We don't have, particularly the middle class doesn't have enough technologies to organize itself. So nobody taught us how to organize or institutionalize our power. And the third reason is that nobody has the time and energy because everybody is too busy living, earning, like life as we know it. The life of a human being, like living is complicated business. It's not easy to live a normal life. Like living a normal life in today's day and age is a very complicated business. Keeping a
How do
track
you
of your
say
health,
so?
your family, just keeping. I think you're trying to solve a multivariable complex problem, right? There are so many variables that run your life. Your health runs your life. The food you eat runs your life. And so many of these are outside your control. You don't know if your partner tomorrow falls ill or loses temper, and it affects you, right? So you're in an interconnected system, and the maid doesn't come, so you're going to have to do the utensils and have lesser time to show up
Not
at work. So So you are in a very complex system and you're also very vulnerable. Complex system, vulnerability, multivariate kind of thing which saps your energy. And plus what we spoke about, your attention is also getting shorter and shorter. So it's a very tough thing to live as a normal adult in today's day and age. And we don't acknowledge it enough. And I think good, committed, honest people still don't have enough time or enough energy to actually come together. I think yeah, I would say that's where it is, and I feel strongly
So
about it. There is
there's
such
this
a huge potential, but I think our citizens movement has just not come together. It's all our
so
collective responsibility. Yeah, sorry.
talking about coming together, you talked about the Sarvanumati. So how would you connect these two things together? Like, coming together and Sarvanumati, how do you do that? And maybe
So
I don't know.
Sarva Anumati,
Yeah.
yeah, Sarva Anumati is Sarva Anumati. It is making decisions with the consent of everybody involved. And it is one of the most non-violent forms of decision making because a group there says we will not move till there is consent on a decision. It's not about consensus because intelligent people can't agree on everything, but it is consent. Like I can live, I can agree to disagree, but I have been heard. My interests have been considered in making the decision, right? And there are technologies of working with full consent, and I really believe that when you work with full consent you have the cooperation of every single person because each person has been heard. And when you work with full consent, the minority is radically empowered because who knows, the minority can be right. We just assume majority is correct, but groupthink
True
also
that.
happens. The majority can be vastly deluded, and what if that one person is right and the 99 were wrong? Did you bother to hear that one person? So I think in our speed of wanting to make decisions and get to places and all, we don't slow down enough to build collective power. And that's why we never come together. We're just busy pulling in all directions.
Right. So Oma has a question. So if the capacity of the movement, the building is destroyed, how do I keep up with the work with youth leadership, collectivization, spark the desire to rebel or challenge?
How do you do it? I mean, I think for young people, it's easier because young people are not still as cynical. As I see it, like the millennial, post-millennial generation seriously sees that they're getting a raw deal. They're getting a raw deal because the planet on which our material economy sustained is kind of running out of its resources. It's reaching planetary boundaries. So you've got a problem, a crisis simmering there. The world is getting increasingly polarized, and it's getting there's a crisis there also. And then locally, like, you have a livelihood crisis, a meaning crisis, you have a mental health crisis. So you've been suddenly born into a generation of a whole set of problems. I mean, you can argue every generation has its problems, yes, but this generation has a lot of issues, right? And so it has enough reason to collectivize. There is enough reason to start coming together as communities, start thinking of innovative solutions, start moving from like traditional entrepreneurship to community entrepreneurship. Can a group of people come together and figure things out together, right? And the way to build that, so one is that, to come together as communities. The second is personal practices, right? So personal practices are really about being the change, and if enough number of us shift our personal consumption patterns, our personal practices, we'll be able to shift the needle on larger scale things also. But enough number of us do not do that. Enough number of us don't boycott a product of a brand if it's violating something. We don't do. There isn't
Right.
enough people don't do shareholder activism. Otherwise companies would listen much more, right? And the third is solidarity. Like, I cannot go where you are, but I can support you. I can sign your petition. I can send a letter on your behalf. So how does the youth movement build solidarity all across? So at Blue Ribbon, we've been doing great work in terms of connecting to various youth movements and convening movements from across the country. And it's a beautiful fabric of small initiatives that are now learning more and more how to come together. And I'm very optimistic with technology. I think we'll be able to do definitely what was missing. One missing piece is kind of coming, and COVID's making us realize so many of these things.
Right. Another question is what mythology to believe oneself post 2020?
Sorry, say that again. What?
What mythology to believe post 2020?
What mythology to believe? So, I mean, like, there is a choice of mythology, so I can't tell you which one to believe, but I can tell you which framing or which mythology I choose. So, I try and look at the mythology or the belief of saying that the earth or humanity is just being born. We are on the edge of coming out of one era and into the other, or we're like the butterfly that's kind of going to break out from the cocoon. And just as the world of the cocoon is very different from the world of the butterfly, right? And the world behind us is the caterpillar world. So we're coming, like we were crawling as caterpillars and now we go into cocoon. We're going to come out as a butterfly. I say that because singularity will come in. I say that because the way technology will move is crazy. The way we'll be able to connect and collaborate is different. The speed of things is also changing. So I just feel we are poised to enter a very different world, a very different era. And I see this also as the birthing of the next level of consciousness in humanity. So I think millennials are being born already with their basic needs satisfied. They're purpose driven. They're thinking way more into the future than previous generations. And I think that's kind of building of consciousness. So to me, the mythology is that this is kind of space between stories. This is the time when there is a phase shift. And the coming phase is going to be new, is going to be exciting. It's not something that any of us can predict. There's nobody today in the world who predicts what's going to happen 5 years later, because it's so volatile that they're most likely to be wrong, right? So all of us are on this edge. It's exciting. हवा आ रही है, अच्छे बाल पीछे उड़ रहे हैं और उस cliff के edge पे जी रहे हैं हम लोग. And it's an exciting it's an exciting kind of time. That's a great mythology for me to believe in. It gives me a lot of hope, rather than the mythology of ship is sinking or there's a crisis which can leave you very depressed. I think us being on a cusp is yeah.
Yeah. And we might have multiple options right now to go towards maybe a particular way.
Do you want to name certain themes and then we can choose which theme to go into from the questions?
Yeah. So one of the themes, I think it's volunteering. People are asking how much to volunteer and how much to, work for money.
70-30 is a good starting position to gun for. I would say if you can do 70% time in earning and 30% in volunteering, that's like kind of, I would say that's the bare minimum. But that's a good starting position. And then you can, of course, keep on as you get more and more productive and get more leverage on your time, or you get promoted in your jobs and so on. Instead of opting for more money, if you can opt for more time, more free time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And if you can get into that kind of a deal, because time is really the currency of the new rich. Your money is getting more and more unlimited, but time is what really is your real currency. So if you can free up your time, right? And so that's kind of one answer. The other answer is volunteering from the surplus of the time that remains after you managing your life. Obviously, right? You don't want your life to be on fire and you're running to volunteer. You want to be able to live well. You want to be able to manage all aspects of your life, and then otherwise you will carry the fire kind of, so to speak, on your tail. And Hanuman ji ki tarah Lanka ko aag jala lenge waisa hai. If we carry the fire with us, the problems will percolate in, right? So I think that's something to think about. Whatever surplus time you can create after taking care of attending to the rest of your lives. But yeah, you have to keep increasing. We all have to keep increasing it. I think just as we pay 33% of our money in tax at the highest slab, we should put in 33%, 30% of our time into social change also.
And maybe inspire more number of people to get into it.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think there's a choice. I think by the time, 10 years from now, more than half of the people will be doing some form of volunteering or social work or the other. And I can this is one prediction I'm willing to put some money on. And the reason is you'll have no choice. The problems and the rate at which they're intensifying are such that you will have to do something. You will be doing some kind of personal practice. You will be doing some kind of local contribution or action. It's going to need all of us on board. And it's like how COVID pushed us to do a behavior shift, which we never thought we would do. Everybody's going with masks, everybody's washing hands. So I think life is going to push us to do it. And so we're all headed that way.
Talking about money, currency, time, I remember you also experimented with something called SOAP. So what is your take on Bitcoin and everything? And also, talking about the future that maybe we are kind of going to engage with in future.
So because I'm not first-hand involved in the field, I have second-hand knowledge, and I must qualify that. So it's not that I'm kind of trading in a cryptocurrency or a blockchain expert, but seems like we're on the edge of something exciting and something revolutionary. And just as when something new comes in, it's quite unpredictable and volatile. So you have crazy Bitcoin and some initial tokens coming in and all. And I just feel those are early stages, but it's a definite horizon. I think there is great work to be done there. Uh, there's a possibility of value getting created there. It's a field worth keeping an eye on for sure. So it's a definitely potentially disruptive technology out there. The Took experiment we had done was called the unconference currency. It was a pop-up currency which we were experimenting in a small group of people. And it was amazing to see how a small group of people, if they agree on a currency, that piece of paper becomes money, and really lets you see how money is just an agreement. It's not just an agreement, because it's so hard to get agreement among so many people onto something. We have all agreed on money, and so that becomes the currency. But good to see how it's so much more made up and has power because of our agreement. And tomorrow, if that agreement shifts to something, if a locality says we agree to value X instead of rupees, you may have local currencies, for example. And I think local currencies are a part of the future. They're very important to stabilize the economy. They're very important to exist in parallel with the fiat currency, so that local economies bloom, they have resilience. So by local currency, I mean, like, if I live in Pimpri Pada, then the local currency is Pimpris, and everybody in Pimpri Pada accepts Pimpris. And if you pay in Pimpris, you have a discount compared to rupees, because it's local. You know that that money will stay in the economy. So Pimpri Pada can come up with its own Pimpris, and somebody can back it up with cash. So I think these things will start happening, and we have to hope that we create conditions for these kind of things to happen.
Right. So somebody is asking about lack of communication. Although, I think I'll frame it like this: that there's too much of communication going on, but really, and there's too much of, like, fonts are big size and red in color and all of that, but nothing is really hitting us. We have kind of developed a kind of a क्या कहते हैं, shield, and where it's nothing really hits us. So what is the best way of communicating to the other people to reach the other person's heart, really?
I'm a very traditionalist in that manner, not so much a believer in necessarily some communication technique or listening technique, though those are helpful to lead you there. I would say first is to go get slow. I think we're all really speeded up, and when you are fast, you communicate at the speed of fast, and that fast communication does not percolate, it does not touch, it does not go inside. It needs us to be slow if we really want to care for somebody. It needs us to be slow and intentional if we want to reach and make an impact. It needs us to be slow if we want to deeply listen. So I would say the first piece is definitely to be slow, and there from that space to really, really care. Right. And how do we take time aside for a deliberate, long, intentional conversation? And I do not necessarily mean only face to face. I'm saying if you and I are on a WhatsApp chat, can we say that for the next 10 minutes, we'll be only on this chat and not do other chats, and allow that chat to happen? You'll see that the WhatsApp space also can intensify, right? Or a one-on-one email space, if you write that email with all your heart, can intensify. So I feel that there is that void in so many hearts for wanting like a genuine connection, for authentically knowing like what's going on with this person, what's the iski feel kya hai, iski nerves kya hai. But वो nerves पकड़ के communicate करने में वक्त लगता है. It takes a while to slow down and to go there, right? And to kind of say, I will not give in to the temptation of being attracted to all this signage, all this glitter, all this glam, and I'll build the discipline to communicate more deeply. And that again, like I said, has to do with consumption. As you start consuming long form, you start thinking long form, you start being deeper, you start communicating more deeply, right? And yeah, I think that's the key there.
Right. So I think this okay. Uma wants to go ahead with a workshop on Sarvanumati. Uma is a founder at Sanjog in Kolkata, and yeah,
Sure,
Uma, I
sure.
think that's a great, great thought.
Yeah, we're happy to help other orgs and other collectives take it on. We think we've stumbled across some amazing technology. We found it in the forests of central India, where a group of tribal village was practicing it, and its origin is some of Vinoba Bhave's ideas. and we are adapting it in a way that it can go to other places and be used in urban context also.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I guess.
Bijal has one Lakshman Rekha between imposed development and self-development. If I understand what, can I take that one? Just in a
Yeah,
quick
please.
thing. If I understand what Bijal is saying is like there is self-development which is like my own need to grow, and then there is imposed development which is like the pressure of the environment for me to grow, right? And I would say that each of us has an innate urge to grow. And I would say the way to honor every urge is to look at the innate urge. So even if there's an external pressure, you reconnect to the innate urge and then you grow with that innate urge. That's when you're really acting on what we call the eros, the growth instinct that every living person has. I think a lot of us lose touch with that growth instinct. But if we dig deep enough, there is a part of you that wants to constantly grow, learn, improve, get better, make life better, right? And really, you want to tap into that, and that's kind of self-development. Imposed development is temporary because you pushed into doing something, or somebody told you you should get better, or your inner critic was on an overdrive and you did something. It's more reactive. I think that's kind of to me the Lakshman Rekha.
Right. Shruti is asking, how to chill. Maybe, you could, how to have a chill life. I guess it's also connected to the long form or slowing down or going slow, easy. So would you like to
Say
take
that
that?
again.
So
Say
she's
that again.
asking, could you talk about chilling as a concept and what specifically it means to you? Is it
It's look,
distorted
yeah,
with
yeah, yeah, yeah.
consuming and bringing content in today's world?
Absolutely. I think so. To me, chilling is a forgotten art, and to me, chilling is something that can really change the world. Uh, I really believe like we can change the world one cup of coffee at a time. I think there is a line between consumption and kind of your basic necessity, right? If I'm going on a coffee date, then I'm going to drink coffee, and that's not like I'm not binging on that kind of consumption. Uh, but what I meant by chilling was really slowing down, firstly, reclaiming time. See, the biggest attack that has happened to us as individuals, as citizens, is an attack on our time. Our time has been stolen away from us. Our attention and vitality kind of are attached to the time. So, time, attention, and vitality. Vitality is like your energy to do things, right? And the act is of reclaiming that. And if you reclaim it and put it into another machinery, then you've not really reclaimed it, right? So the aim is to kind of reclaim it and use it to slow down, use it to explore, use it to have that deep conversation with a fellow person, and kind of find out the common truth, right? I really believe that in this chaos and confusion, deep dialogue can take us closer to a shared truth, and shared truths are more powerful as ways of taking action, right? So
Right.
so this is kind of intentional. It's an intentional process, right? Of reclaiming that time and then using it to chill. And by chill, I mean chill to reflect, chill to spend time with nature, chill to connect deeply with someone. Not chill as consume, right? Because that will still leave you very shallow. Chill is to experience life firsthand. I think that's what I would say.
Right. So, like we are quite close to the end of it. At least a question is coming to me is like, how do you suggest that we sit together and co-create future which is good for all of us? So you might have many other options. Like we might have multiple options today. We are at a crossroads, and we might have multiple options, and which way we go is something that we decide for our children. So, what are your suggestions on co-creating something which is beautiful for maybe next 50 years, 100 years to come?
So right now it seems we are in a total chaos, a noisy chaos where everybody is doing their own thing and trying to kind of figure out this is good and then just do a little bit of this or that. And I think there is a clear case for taking time out to think firstly from your own vantage view, what you think is needed, but also then dialoguing with others and creating shared truths. There's like personal truth has this quality, shared truth has a better quality. The more shared the truth, the higher quality that truth is, and the more it has been arrived at after like discussion, churning, and so on, the better quality it is. Now, this good quality truth, which people call signal, a lot of thinkers call signal, is great to act on. It's like good raw material for action. If you act on your own truth, there'll be only so much impact. But if you act on a shared truth that has been arrived at after dialogue, after discussion, after factoring in several views, that's a better truth to act on. And when you act on that higher truth, you're able to create a better impact. So we desperately need a shared view of the world. We need a shared vision of where we are headed. But we're just so busy doing, we're just so busy in the short run, we're just so panicked, we're so involved in solving day-to-day kind of problem after problem after problem that we're not really taking time to zoom out. And the philosophy of chill actually lets you in a way zoom out and really see what's going on, what's the larger vision, and where are we headed there. And I think creating that shared truth, that shared vision is kind of the first step. The second step then is to act jointly, right? Building our capacity to act jointly. And that can happen when we agree, when we are able to make agreements on how we act and what kind of actions do we take, right? And that takes time to build. You need communities, you need ways of doing things. And I would say the third then is kind of the whole, like I said, the earlier piece of solidarity, where I can't come where you are, but I can support you from where I am, right? And we can, sitting in our comfort areas of urban areas, we can still support people's struggles, we can still support human rights petitions, we can do a lot.
Right. So my question again will be like you talked about people coming together, but this is also an era where there's a lot of individualism, where people want their own space and they want control and all of that. So how does one address to that part?
I mean, I think you have to keep it really under check. Like, if left unchecked, individualism can drive you berserk, right? We all have within us this faculty, whether you call it the ego or whether you call it the I function. It's a faculty that kind of runs with thought, and it's so preoccupied with itself. I'm so preoccupied myself that if I don't keep it under check, then I can totally go into an overdrive, right? If you don't keep your own obsession with yourself and your own individualization, natural individualization under check, because the environment is constantly reminding you and referring to you as an individual. It's not talking to you as a collective. So that message is
Right.
everywhere in the air. It's almost like you can breathe it, right? But
Right.
that's where I would say the whole libertarian Ayn Rand kind of world I disagree with, because in over individualizing we lose the joy of connection and togetherness, and we lose what comes from deep communion, right? And that to me is like you have to keep your ego on the dog's leash in a way, otherwise it's going to go all over and make you do things for itself. So I would say a lot of this work is to control that whole ego piece. And like Baijal is saying, capitalization, urbanization, individualization, like capitalization is nothing but like capitalism is really your own ego outside. The same behaviors that are happening inside you, if you want to see outside, it's just the same behavior. It's the same things going on, as above, so below, as within, so without. So yeah.
I am saying one thing for 1 minute while, because in the urban scenario we have always we have already seen that beyond the flats, those who are societies in urban areas, we do not aware about neighbors and relatives, and in the rural area everybody is closely relative, closely know about the person, about the problems, about the suggestions, about the aspects. But urbanization problem
But
is
can you
so
come to
much
the
deep
question, Baiju?
that the
Yeah, come to the question.
I have said my view.
Oh, that was your view. Okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Only one thing I want to tell Bajal personally from my end is that I'm not anti cities. I'm a city child, so I love my cities. And if you see in cities, if neighborhoods are given time, see, cities are very new, villages are very old. Villages have been around for hundreds and thousands of years, so there has been time and space for relationships to develop. But in urban areas also, if you see areas where populations have been stable over longer periods, there are relationships that develop. There are local resident welfare associations, ALMs come in, people get to know each other, there is neighboring. So I feel that intimacy is not impossible to create in urban areas either. It needs time. It's not something that can happen instantly. You have come from some other region, I have come from some other region. Takes a while, but it's definitely possible. I think sustainable cities are possible. I'm kind of a believer in that.
Okay, Malhar has a question which is interesting. That's why I'm taking it. Would you tell somebody? What would you tell somebody who has slipped into nihilism?
Camo and absurdism doesn't seem to help. I mean, for anybody who slipped into nihilism, I'd like ask them to go and make direct contact with life. I feel when we split mind and body and then let the mind go into an overdrive, then the mind kind of theorizes and thinks and makes kind of layers and layers of theory, right? And builds a disconnection with life. And by connection to life, I would mean connection to the living world, connection to the natural world, connection to the flowers and plants and birds, and really taking time to see this vast, mysterious unfolding that's going on. And it's so beautiful, vast, and mysterious. But to truly experience that, one has to really come out of their own kind of thought bubbles and thought traps that can totally get to them. Like nihilism is like really, really serious. It can make people kill themselves, right? So it's really really problematic. So I would invite more Eastern kind of philosophy, looking at Eastern philosophy, looking at Sufism, looking at God as your lover, or looking at Navrasas, exploring all the Navrasas, right? Or looking at even Buddhism, if you have a kind of tendency towards that kind of a thought process, then you can look at kind of Buddhism. But I would invite you to kind of the Eastern way. It's like, come visit the Eastern world. I mean, and I'm also still exploring, so I'm kind of qualifying that. But I would say I've found Eastern wisdom traditions have a richer kind of a richer celebration of life and living.
Okay. I guess, yeah. So it's actually 6 now. So would you like to take one more question? The woman is asking, how do we push conversation from personal truth to shared truth and deeper? So how do you push that deeper relationship? How does that
I mean, it
happen for you?
requires a
Because
certain,
to hear.
yeah, so it requires a certain form of dialogue. And the form of dialogue is where I talk to you, you listen so deeply that you are able to summarize my point as if I would say it. So one is you listen to me so deeply that you can recreate what I am saying. That's kind of step one. Having done that or being able to do that, it's almost like I say something, you first repeat to me what I'm trying to tell you, and I will keep saying it till I'm convinced that you got my point. Once you got my point, like once you heard it at that depth, like you don't need to actually do it, but you have to hear it at that depth. Then from that, you choose the parts which resonate with you and you amplify them back. You say, okay, I heard, you said A, B, C, D. Out of this, B and C seem to be particularly pertinent to me because, B, C, and G, right? So you say those things. And then I say, okay, I hear that, and C and G resonate with me. So I think C and G is where I agree. So now the C and G is a higher truth than either the ABC or the DE that you had, right? And that's how you keep going back and forth. And it's a lot about body and resonance. It's not only about kind of just thinking, but it has also a body element, right? A real body element.
Right.
So you should feel it with your body also. You feel the resonance. You feel like you're coming to something more exciting by the energy. The energetic content of shared truth is different from the energetic content of individual truth.
Right.
We can take one or two more if you want. I think there's
Yeah,
a
sure.
short one.
Yeah. So Sankalp is saying nice talk. So how to go beyond being driven of guilt and anger in social work?
So even before that, Rajiv is here. Rajiv is a dear friend. Hi, Rajiv. And hi, Dhaval. Good to see my friends here. Rajiv's question is, which movie character has the chill? For me, Big Lebowski has the chill. He's the guy, the
That
dude.
is a good
He's the guy
question, by
who's...
the way.
Sorry?
That is a good question.
Yeah. Which movie character has the chill? So I would definitely say Big Lebowski has the chill. In some ways, Three Idiots Rancho also has a certain form of chill, right? Like all is well and don't kind of get fried and bothered. up. So I would say these two definitely, have the chill. Jackie Chan in some of his movies has the chill. He's having fun while he's fighting. So I would say some of that. Rajiv's a film buff, so that's the question. How to go beyond being driven of guilt and anger in social work. So this is a question that's been alive for me for a while, and it's still alive. But I think what I'm realizing is they are not me. I can empathize, I can feel for them, but if I take that to an extreme, of saying that they are me, if I take them, Rashmi, you are the host, you can mute them. Yeah. So if you take it to an extreme of saying that, oh, they are me, and so I must feel as sad as they are feeling. Like I remember, I have felt so sad for migrants, and I felt so sad for hungry people, and I felt so sad that it affects me so deeply. And at some stage now, I'm like, maybe I need to set some healthier boundaries. I need to say that I feel them, but I don't need to feel like them. I feel their sadness, and I'm doing the best I can from where I am located, but I can't be them. I can't leave everything I have, and it's just not my pack of cards in life, and each of us has them, so I can wish them well. I think so that kind of a part is one definite part. I would say that the other is just the guilt. I think the way I respond to the guilt is that we are all children of God. I say we are the children of existence, और ये existence की पूरी जो विरासत है वो हमारी है. We are free to enjoy what we want to enjoy. We are free to experience life in all its abundance or all its scarcity. So I think for me spiritually, I look at it and say that every soul is having the kind of trip it had signed up for. And I feel we're all in this nice fancy dress competition, pretending to be like ourselves and getting exactly what we want out of life. Getting to play the roles we want to play in life. Like you come to the fancy dress competition dressed as ourselves, and including our problems, including our good things. It's like we must have signed up for it before we were born, and now we're going through it. So I like that kind of a perspective to think about. So
yeah, right. Any other questions? Learning and applying what we learn, how to pick up exactly what we have to apply.
Whatever works, you keep it. That's how you decide what to apply. So when you learn things, you try them out into action. When you try them into action, you will start seeing patterns. You'll start seeing what works. As you start seeing what works, you are able to kind of start building your own theory. You're not borrowing others' theories. You're not borrowing others' ideas. You're creating your own theories of what works. So what you apply is what works. If it stops working, you stop kind of going in, right? So you test everything out. That's my invitation to everybody here. Like test it all out.
Right. So yeah, how do one identify one's passion? I guess we already talked about it.
How do you identify one's passion? I think there is some sanskar. इसको हम संस्कार कह सकते हैं. बचपन से there are things that you feel attracted to, you feel drawn to, you feel doing. And yeah, of course, every boy wants to be a cricketer when they're a child, but then there are different dimensions of being a cricketer that excited you. For some, it was probably the crowd that was going to clap for you that excited you. For others, it was the competition that excited them. So your life has a lot of heads. And if you open the book of your life and see, you'll start seeing recurring patterns. You'll start seeing these are the times when I was happiest. These are the times when I was at my best. And if you are able to, if you're able to kind of find those clues and weave them together, what doesn't make you miserable that would make someone else miserable. So there are things that you can do again and again and again without feeling miserable, and somebody else will get completely bored doing it, right? And that's kind of your sort of your seat that you out.
Right. I guess there's an interesting question from Madhur. It is what have you stopped believing post COVID-19?
Post झटके में भी बदल सकती है, और झटके में बदलने की क्षमता है, और होपफुली सही direction में झटके लगते रहेंगे. I think COVID-19 is a great झटका for at least people to look around and see how fragile our systems are, how clueless our leaders are, with due respects to them and with due sympathy, empathy for them. It's like it's got everybody clueless, right? And the complexity of the problem is so high that trying to do anything, one size doesn't fit all, and anything you do is going to have consequences. So it's a tough one. But I think the way it has changed so many things, like work from home has started happening. I'm like, wow, when things are going to change, they're really going to change, and they'll not necessarily change incrementally. I mean, I knew it in theory. I'd read Black Swan and Taleb and all, but I had not firsthand experienced it. We were pretty insulated from 2008 crisis and so on. But this is kind of
So I guess we'll come to an end. Any last thoughts, words, anything that comes to you?
Last thoughts that come to me. I guess my last thought is just that, I mean, life is tough, and that one has to apply all their intelligence to live a meaningful, balanced, healthy life. It's not easy. And life has a price. It asks for a price always. You have to, if you pay the price, you have what you want, right? And it's just like some of us are ready to pay the price, others don't want to pay the price. And there is no, both are honorable, both are fair. I don't judge anybody who earlier I would judge people who would not want to pay the price for following their passions and all that. But I've realized that's fine. That's an equally honorable choice. You can find yourselves in the places. And yeah, that's it. Apart from that, happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Rashmi.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everyone, for being here and waiting for 10 minutes extra and being here till the end. Thanks a lot.
A big thank for such a good discussion for you, with you.
Thank you, Basil.